expecting to give this talk, Giuliano said, would you like to say something on virtual library museums pages, which were very early pages that I produced in the 1990s. And I said, well, I don't have any slides. But then this morning, I thought, well, I'll go and see what I can find in the way of slides in my paper archives. I do have electronic archives, but they're difficult to access. So paper is a wonderful medium for, as Graham Diprose will tell you, for maintaining even electronic resources. You can go and read Graham's papers on this. So I'm going to try and share my screen. So I hope you can all see this. So this is the beginning of a talk that I gave in the mid-1990s. It was a time where you can see my affiliation then. I was at the Oxford University Computing Laboratory. We were one of the lucky places, because we were a university, we had our own web server, as you can see down there at the bottom. That no longer exists, but if you go on archive.org, you'll find it. And so we were able to basically put things on the web server. I knew something about museums, and I knew something about computing and so on. I knew I'd got this server there, and I started noting that there were some very early museums online, the ones that Giuliano has pointed out. So I thought I'll create a little list, and then I found, oh yes, there's this thing called the virtual library, which you can join. It's still there, but not used so much because we now have Google and so on. In those days, there weren't any search engines. If you wanted to find things, you essentially needed to look for directories. So this was an online directory started by Tim Berners-Lee, who realized you need to find your way around the web. And anyone could volunteer to look after different parts of this virtual library. So I volunteered my section on museums, and that was accepted by Arthur Secret, who was organizing it from CERN at the time. And then I started getting lots of emails from people saying, please add my museum, and so on. So it developed very rapidly. I think at that time, everything was doubling every 3 months. So number of accesses, number of websites, etc., was expanding very rapidly. But I thought, well, I'm going to be famous, because if it keeps going on this speed, I'll be doing very well. I was told at the beginning I had more hits than News International, for instance, but of course, I've now fallen by the wayside, but it was nice to be doing interesting things at that time. So I was actually collecting statistics, so you can see how quickly it's accelerated. I started this in 1994, when there were only maybe 1,000 websites around, and you can see the speed of doubling. That's each month from August 1994, when I started it. Yes, if you had access to the website, you had access to all sorts of interesting information. So on our website of the Computing Laboratory, the museums page was by far the most popular page of all the pages. Nobody was interested in the computer science stuff, but they were all interested in the museums, which you can see at the top there. Then other pages, you can see there was a page on world museums, particularly on USA museums, galleries, as you look down, general information, lists from other museums, and so on. So you can see that there was a lot of interest, because this was only really the only list of museums available. You could also look at where accesses were coming from. So you can see a lot of accesses from the US there. I guess not surprisingly, UK, there were quite a lot of accesses, and you go down, I guess all the G7 type countries, France, Italy, etc., are there, and you go down. But you can see, if you keep going down this list, it goes on and on. You know, there were accesses coming from all over the world. You could also look at access by hour, and at that time, I guess it was being relatively US centric. This followed US daytime, nighttime. So you can see the low there in the morning at about 8 AM, because that's the middle of the night in the US. So that's what was driving the internet at the time. Also days of the week, I guess less accentuated, but you can see that more people were accessing during weekdays than the weekends, because in those days, people accessing the internet were mainly doing it on their work computers. No smartphones, no mobile access at that time. I'm sure if you looked at this now, there'd be more access at the weekends, because that's when people have got time to look at things online. You can also look at individual sites. Well, I guess I was accessing it a lot, as you can see at the top, to check it and so on. But there were accesses coming from the virtual library website at CERN. In the UK, Demon was a big internet service provider, so you can see that was providing a lot of accesses and so on down. A lot of US companies and also US academic sites and so on. I've highlighted a few on that list. This is what the page looked like. It's fairly boring by modern standards. It did get improved over the years, but I did have a counter on there. This was fairly early on. Eventually, it had millions of visitors, but essentially it was very text-based. And actually, I was very interested also in accessibility. So at that time, people were starting to use fancy things online, but if you were blind or so on, it was very difficult to access these. So one thing I was quite proud of is that the blind people and so on, disabled, said that this is a very nicely accessible website at the time. So you could use, for instance, a browser that spoke this, and you could follow the links and so on. Now, this is a previously unpublished letter, but of course I was very excited by the fact that there was the web. I thought this is going to be wonderful for museums. So I wrote originally in August, I think, of 1994 to the Museums Journal, very enthusiastic, with some printouts of websites saying this is going to be wonderful for the museum community. Of course, no response, but I thought, well, I'll keep going. So this was actually my second letter saying, this is the World War I type protocol. If you don't receive an answer, always send the message again, because people answer the second time and ignore the first one. So duly, this second letter, and you can see it really was a letter printed out and sent to them. I signed the letter that they got. They answered and said, oh yes, we have noticed there's this thing called the web coming along. They actually had an editorial soon after talking about museums online, and the next year they published one of my an article by me called Collections of Collections about the virtual library and so on. So I guess the museums did catch on, but not immediately from the beginning. This was another. I was obviously using this to publish lots of articles and papers, because I'm an academic and that's what we do as academics. So this was actually my first ever article for the Times Higher Education supplement, called Exhibitions in the Ether, but basically talking about museums online and so on. So that was 1995, I think. So next year, of course, I could start comparing differences between countries, how the accesses have gone up. And you might think, well, US and UK, they're going to be high, which certainly they were. But when you actually think of this in terms of population, then actually they weren't necessarily the highest. So you notice there, Brazil in 1996, for some reason, the internet must have taken off in Brazil in 1996, and a huge number of accesses from Brazil suddenly in 1996 per head of population, and comparatively. So looking at other per heads of population, for instance, Scandinavia, there are a lot of accesses from Scandinavia, given the population in Scandinavia. Perhaps it's because it's dark there in the winter and the internet comes along and you can access things and do interesting things. So that may be a reason why Scandinavia was so early using the internet. As I said, I was busy publishing papers. That's a paper in a journal, one of my first journal papers on it. I guess one of the issues that we have with even then was spam. So I thought you might find this quite fun to look at some spam emails from the 1990s, which I was getting. I remember at the time that Donald Knuth, who's a well-known computer scientist, who actually originally wrote the tech program that formatted all those slides that you've just seen, He said he gave up email in 1985 because he'd already been on email for 10 years, and he reckoned that 10 years was enough email for anyone in their life. But these are 1990 emails I had to deal with. So one person talking about some artists I've never heard of, etc. And then, of course, the usual trying to sell me a Stradivarius, which maybe is still available for sale. So if you want me to put you in touch with this person, you'd be very welcome to make contact. So there's the access details. Fortunately, this is a very old email address, so anyone trying to send me spam using this email address will not get through to me. But you're very welcome to contact me on via EVA and so on if you wish. And just as a final slide, although it's not quite time for coffee, this was one of the very early sort of real-time websites produced by the Cambridge Computer Laboratory, where people started to get annoyed because coffee was running out in the coffee room. So they decided they put a real-time video of the coffee machine, which was accessible to anyone in the world, but was most useful to people in the building because they could check if the coffee was getting empty. They knew they better go down and fill it up in the common room. So that's just a silly thing to end on. But I hope you like the retro feel for looking at museums from the 1990s. And with that, I'll stop sharing. And we'll have a look at the Q&A. So there's another question from Javier Peroda on should it become another ISO standard like CDOC, etc. Any comments, Giuliano?
I have to admit I'm not so expert in CDOC standards, so I will leave the I will leave maybe the answer to you if you are more expert than me. I think maybe yes, but I'm not. Again, I'm not an expert, so I don't want to.
Well, I've been involved. I've seen standards. Most standards take 10 years to produce, and then people have moved on by the end of 10 years. So that's one reason why, for instance, we're using the internet and not X400 protocols. Internet was very quick. It had requests for comments, RFCs, if anyone remembers those. Anyone could put out a request for comment with a new ideas. So that's what Tim Berners-Lee did with the web. Instantly, people thought, well, fairly quickly, people thought, this is wonderful. And they started using the web just because an individual had put that out online. Whereas X400 was a lot of industrial partners meeting about once a year, very slow to do anything. And now, of course, we're all using internet protocols and the web, and not some of these other rather slower. So that's just my view as an individual. I think the first idea with Wikidata is, it's there, it's being used. That's a good place to put stuff now, I would say. Any other questions? Oh, well, we've got some. So if you look at the chat, Giuliano, we've got some suggestions from the chat with yes, a science citizen science project from Anne. So
yeah, definitely it would be fantastic to use it. And also I think that sorry, it's a different subject, but you brought me with the wonderful spam message. You told me that also a history of spam could be interesting, especially an history of cultural spam. I remember when we were working at the Science Museum, we were offered the Leonardo's paintings yes. once at least once every 2 months. So
yes, so you
and maybe one
yes, I get the Stradivarius, you get the Leonardo's.
Yes,
yes
exactly,
right.
exactly.
Yes.
So this could also be very interesting. But yes, and it would be fantastic to have the exploring. Javier said there was a project expiring the 404 error pages as well. Yes, they are very, very interesting, the 404 pages.
Yes, well, I guess archive.org can help with that, because things sort of disappear and the 404 message appears on archive.org till they give up. Yes, I've been told that the average life of a web page, I don't know if this is still true, is 3 months. So, it's very short lifespan of most web pages. That one of Tim Berners-Lee starting it is a very exceptional web page lasting for decades. But most web pages are very ephemeral.
I've seen someone raising their hands.
Where's that on the Q&A? Oh, I think
Yeah,
if anyone
on the
type any more on the Q&A, they're welcome. You're also welcome to type in thoughts on the chat. We probably need to move on to the next presentation very shortly. So if there isn't a last question, I suggest we try and keep to time and let Katerina give her presentation. So thank you very much, Giuliano. And,
thank you.
I enjoyed your presentation. Unfortunately, we don't get a lot of claps. I'll give you a little.